You can judge me. I get it. You're probably already thinking, oh, here we go. Another woman who got involved with someone she shouldn't have. And you'd be right. But not for the reasons you think. You see, I didn't set out to ruin anything. I didn't wake up one day thinking, you know what? I think I'll fall for a married man today. No. It was quieter than that. Slower. Like a faucet with a slow drip. One that you barely notice, until it floods the whole damn house. It started on a Tuesday. One of those Tuesdays that feels like a Monday, gray skies, too quiet, the kind of day that makes your bones feel heavier than they should. I was in my kitchen unpacking boxes again. Another new beginning. Another attempt to build something out of nothing. And that's when I saw him. Micah, tall, lean, wiping sweat off his brow while stacking mulch bags like it was therapy. He was my new neighbor, the kind you notice immediately, but pretend you didn't. I wasn't looking for anyone. God, no. I was still recovering from the last man who looked me in the eyes and promised forever, then disappeared emotionally for most of it. But Micah, he didn't just see me. He noticed me. And I don't mean in the way that makes your heart flutter, not at first. It was the small stuff. Like offering to carry that Godofel planter I shouldn't have bought in the first place. Or how he looked at me when I spoke, like I was the only voice in the room. And let me tell you something. After years of being in a marriage where I felt like wallpaper, that kind of attention, it hits different. Not loud. Not bright. Just warm. But here's the thing. Micah was married. And I knew that. I never forgot that. But what I didn't expect was to see him in a moment I shouldn't have. A private moment, one that wasn't meant for me. And instead of walking away, I stayed. I helped. And that was the beginning of everything. You can think what you want about me. You can say I crossed a line. That I betrayed some unspoken code. Maybe I did. But if you've ever felt invisible, truly invisible, and then, one day, someone looks at you like you're not just real, but seen, you'll understand why I let it happen. This isn't a fairy tale. There's no neat ending tied up with a bow. Just a story of two people, lost in different ways, who found something real at the absolute wrong time. So, before you judge me, listen. Just listen. It had been 3 weeks since I moved into that house. 3 weeks of quiet mornings, unopened boxes, and meals eaten standing up in the kitchen because I hadn't had the heart to unroll the rug under the dining table yet. There's a certain silence that comes with starting over. Not the peaceful kind, not the exhale on a beach kind. No, this was different. This was the kind of silence that creeps into your bones. That makes you talk to yourself just to prove you're still in there. That's where I was. My marriage had ended the way a candle does, not with drama, not with smoke. Just one last flicker. Then darkness. He didn't cheat. He didn't scream. He just stopped trying. Stopped looking at me like I mattered. Stopped listening when I spoke. So I packed the pieces of myself I had left and moved 2 cities over to a cul-de-sac where the lawns were always trimmed and the neighbors waved without expecting conversation. It was a Tuesday. Always a Tuesday with me, I don't know why. I had just dragged this massive ceramic planter out of my car, a last-minute impulse buy I thought would make the porch look welcoming, and immediately regretted it. It weighed as much as my past. I was halfway up the front steps, arms shaking, trying not to tip it over when I heard his voice for the first time. Need a hand? I looked up, squinting against the sun. There he was. White t-shirt, grass-stained jeans, slight sheen of sweat across his forehead. Tall, athletic. The kind of calm presence that doesn't announce itself but somehow fills the whole space anyway. I didn't know who he was, not yet. But something in the way he said it, the ease of it, made me feel like I didn't have to prove anything. I smiled, embarrassed. It's fine. I've got it. But also, I absolutely don't. He grinned and stepped up without another word, lifting the planter like it weighed nothing. I watched him carry it up to my porch, place it gently near the door, then dust off his hands like he did this all the time. Clara, I said, holding out my hand. Just moved in. He took it. His grip was warm. Micah, I'm just across the street. There was a pause. Not awkward. Just full. He looked around, took in the mess of cardboard and open paint swatches strewn across my porch. Starting fresh. I nodded. Something like that. And then I saw it. The ring. Silver. Simple. Worn down enough that it had clearly been on his finger for years. I noticed it. Of course I did. But what I really noticed was the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The way he looked at the ground before he looked back at me, like maybe he'd been somewhere else just then. Somewhere far away. That was it. Our first meeting. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing dramatic. He helped, I thanked him, and he went back to trimming the hedges around his mailbox. But something about the way he walked away stayed with me. Not because I was attracted to him, not then. But because for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not as someone's ex-wife. Not as the woman rebuilding from scratch. Just Clara. That night, I sat on my front porch with a glass of red wine, watching the sun go down. It dipped behind Micah's roofline, this soft golden hue that made the whole street look like something out of a movie. He came out to grab his mail around 7. Waved. I waved back. Nothing was said. But his gaze lingered. Not in a hungry way. Not inappropriate. Just longer than it should have. It was the kind of look that makes your stomach tighten and your mind race, not because of what it meant, but because of what it could mean if you weren't careful. I told myself not to read into it. He was being neighborly, friendly. That's all. But as I walked back inside, I caught myself smiling. And I hadn't done that, not really, in a long, long time. It started small. Little things. Nothing you'd blink at on the surface. A wave when I brought my trash cans to the curb. A smile when we crossed paths during my morning walks and his jogs, him with his earbuds in, me with coffee in hand, hair messy, no makeup. He always noticed me. Even then. I started seeing him more. Not intentionally, at least not at first. He was just there. Out front trimming hedges, washing his car, hauling in bags of dog food I never saw a dog for. And I was always conveniently outside too. Watering plants I knew didn't need it, pretending to look for packages. Fixing imaginary smudges on my windows. We began to talk more. Nothing deep. Just neighbors, right? Jokes about the weather. The terrible mail service. How my house still smelled like fresh paint and old regrets. One morning, I changed my hair. Just a subtle wave instead of the usual knot on top of my head. And he noticed. Didn't even hesitate. Just said, "New look suits you." With that same quiet, easy tone. Like he didn't even have to think about it. It shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. Because noticing, that kind of noticing, it's rare. Especially when you've gone years feeling invisible. So I baked. Banana bread, the one recipe I always made when I was trying to keep myself grounded. I wrapped it in parchment paper, tied a string around it like I wasn't trying too hard, and walked across the street like it was the most casual thing in the world. His wife wasn't home. I didn't ask where she was. And he didn't offer it. He smiled when he saw it. "Smells like trouble," he said, taking it from my hands, fingers brushing mine. That touch. God. That brush. It wasn't even a second long, but it stayed with me the entire walk back to my porch. It was like static. Quiet, invisible, but buzzing in my skin. I told myself again. He was married. And I reminded myself every day. But then again, so was I once. And I remember what it felt like to be standing in the same room as someone who used to love you, wondering if you'd actually disappeared and no one had noticed. One evening, a week later, he knocked on my door. Paint chips in hand. Big smile. "I'm redoing the guest room." "Figured I'd surprise her," he said. "She's been saying she wants a reading nook." I suck at colors. "You mind?" I hesitated. Not because of him. But because of me, because I knew the version of myself I was when I started craving this kind of closeness. Still, I let him in. We sat on the floor, samples spread out across the rug I'd finally unrolled. He asked questions. He listened. He genuinely listened. And then our hands reached for the same swatch, this pale green that reminded me of the seafoam walls in my grandmother's kitchen. Our fingers touched. It should have been nothing. But we didn't move. Just stayed there, fingertips resting against each other. Neither of us spoke. The air shifted. It thickened. Slowed. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. The rain starting to tick against the window. My own breath catching in my throat. And then he pulled back. I did too. He cleared his throat. I laughed way too loud, like I could cover it with noise. Seafoam's a classic, I said. He nodded. Yeah, classic. We didn't talk about it. Not then. He left 20 minutes later with a list of colors and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes again. I watched him walk across the street, watched the light in his front hallway flicker on, and I stood at my window longer than I should have. I knew better. But the part of me that had been starved for connection, real, unspoken connection, was waking up. And once something like that wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep quietly. It happened, slowly. Not in one of those whirlwind, movie scene ways where clothes come flying off and reason melts in a single kiss. No, it was quieter than that. More dangerous, too. Because you don't see it coming when it moves like this, like water, seeping through the cracks you thought were sealed. It had rained that whole day. The kind of rain that blurs everything outside and makes the inside feel too still. I was curled on the couch with a blanket and a book I wasn't really reading. The house smelled like cinnamon tea and old memories. Then I heard it. A knock on the door. Not urgent. Just there. I opened it to find Micah, standing beneath the overhang, drenched, hair flattened to his forehead, holding a paint can like it had betrayed him. Power's out, he said, pushing back wet strands from his face. Everywhere but here, apparently. You mind if I store this inside for a bit? Didn't want to leave it out in the truck. I blinked. Stupid, really, how I hesitated, like the rain had knocked the thoughts right out of me. Yeah, of course. Come in. He stepped inside, water dripping from his sleeves. He smelled like damp cotton and something else, something warm, clean. I handed him a towel. He dried his hands. We stood there in the entryway, two people pretending this was normal. I can't believe the grid skips your house, he said. Perks of being at the bottom of the hill, I joked, trying to lighten the weight between us. But it stayed. It always stayed. We moved to the living room. I offered tea. He accepted. I poured it slowly, hands steady even though my chest had started to hum again, that low, restless hum that only ever meant trouble. He sat on the couch, across from where I'd been curled just minutes earlier. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the book I'd dropped beside the blanket. You read this? He asked. I nodded. Trying to. He picked it up, thumbed through the pages, then looked at me. I used to watch her read all the time. My wife. She'd curl up like this, and I'd try not to interrupt her. The air changed. I felt it. He'd never spoken about her like that before. Not past tense, exactly, but not quite present either. You two seem, I started, then stopped, because I didn't actually know what we were. What they were. All I had were stolen glances and silent questions. He looked at me. And then he said it. We haven't touched each other in over a year. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, holding my mug, the steam fogging my vision. He kept going. She says she's tired. That life is overwhelming. That she needs space. And I get it. I do. But sometimes I feel like I'm just furniture. Something she walks around. God. That hit something in me so hard, I almost dropped the cup. Because I knew that feeling. I'd lived that feeling. I set the mug down and leaned back. The silence stretched between us again, but this time, it felt like an invitation. Then he said, softly, "You don't look at me like I'm invisible." My breath caught. He looked down, almost like he regretted it. I shouldn't have said that. I shook my head, heart pounding. No, it's okay. Then we just sat there, listening to the rain, to our own breathing, to every unspoken thing crackling between us like the thunder outside. And then, he reached for the book again, handed it to me. Our fingers touched. But this time, neither of us pulled away. It was such a small thing, that touch. But something shifted. Not just in the room, in me. I looked at him. He looked at me. And then he said it, so softly I almost didn't hear. "You don't have to pretend anymore." That line. It tore through me. Because that's what I'd been doing for years, pretending. Pretending I was okay. Pretending I didn't miss being noticed. Pretending I didn't crave connection so badly I ached with it. The dam cracked. I stood up, walked toward the window to hide whatever was rising in me, hands clenched tight. He followed. Stood just a few inches behind. I could feel the heat of him. Not touching me, but there. I turned around. Met his eyes. And in that moment, I almost let it happen. Almost leaned in. Almost gave in to everything screaming inside me. But I didn't. I just whispered, "You should go." He nodded. Didn't argue. Just walked to the door, his hand brushing mine one last time as he opened it. Then he stepped into the rain. And I stood there, hand still tingling, chest still heaving, wondering what I'd just let come alive between us. We hadn't kissed. We hadn't touched, not really. But the line? The line had been crossed. And I knew. There was no going back. After that night, everything was the same and nothing was. Micah and I didn't talk about it. We didn't even text for a few days. But the silence wasn't distance. It was charged. Like the quiet before lightning. Then it started again, gently. A message about leftover paint. A knock on my door asking if I had the right drill bit. A shared laugh at the mailbox when we both reached for it at the same time. It was all so casual on the surface. But underneath, it was an avalanche waiting to happen. He started texting me little things, not important things. A song he heard on the radio. A picture of a crooked shelf he hung and was proud of. A photo of his dog tangled in bedsheets. Things that didn't matter. And somehow, that's what made them matter more. He was letting me into the ordinary parts of his day. Not just the emotional leftovers. Not just the pain. I found myself waiting for those messages. Checking my phone with a flutter I hadn't felt in years. Smiling like a teenager over emojis. One afternoon, I helped him hang curtains in his guest room. We stood on opposite ends of the rod, arms above our heads. And when we finished, we both stood back, admiring the way the fabric caught the light. He turned to me. I looked up at him. That same tension rippled between us, like we were standing on the edge of something too big to name. He didn't touch me. Not then. But his eyes. God, those eyes. They said everything. That night, he stayed longer. It started with music. I was playing an old record, something soft, something slow. And he asked what it was. I told him. He said it reminded him of being 16 again, of first kisses and backseat laughter. We both laughed. But not loud. Like we were afraid the sound might crack the moment. Then he offered his hand. A simple gesture. "Dance with me," he said. My body hesitated. My heart didn't. I placed my hand in his, and he pulled me gently toward him. We swayed in the living room, my bare feet on the hardwood, his hand low on my back. It was innocent, and absolutely not. The song played on, and we didn't speak. We just moved together like we had always known how. Then, he brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered near my jaw, and I looked up. He whispered, "I think about you more than I should." My breath caught. So did his. And in that single pause, I did the one thing I'd told myself I wouldn't. I leaned in. Or maybe he did. I don't even know anymore. But our lips met. Slow, soft, like a question neither of us wanted to answer. Then it deepened. Hands tangled, breaths quickened, and time disappeared. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't wild. It was desperate in the quietest way. We pulled apart just long enough to breathe. I shouldn't be here, he said. I nodded. I know. But neither of us moved. We ended up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, limbs tangled, just holding. No words. Just the sound of our breathing and the fading echo of the music. When he left, it was nearly 2 a.m. He kissed my forehead, told me he'd never felt more like himself than when he was with me. And then he was gone. I sat on the couch long after, wrapped in that same blanket, staring at the space he'd left behind. And the guilt. It came fast. Not like a storm. More like a leak. Slow. Relentless. Every time we were together, it felt like I could breathe again. Every time we weren't. The guilt clawed at me, not at the edges of my joy until it felt paper-thin. I started avoiding his wife. Every time I saw her at the mailbox, I found a reason to turn away. Water my plants. Dig through my purse. Anything to not look her in the eye. My sister came over one day. Said I seemed lighter. But in that suspicious way only sisters have. What's going on with you? She asked. I shrugged. Lied. Just enjoying the quiet. But there was no quiet in me. Just noise. Crashing, aching noise. Micah and I began finding new ways to meet. Quick lunches. Evening walks that ended in long stares. We talked about everything. Music that made us cry. Books that broke us open. Regrets. Dreams. The kind of happiness we thought we'd never be allowed to want again. He told me he used to want to be a chef. That he never learned guitar because his father told him it was a waste of time. That he felt like he'd missed his own life. And I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years. That my marriage ended not in anger, but in silence. That I forgot what it felt like to be chosen. To be touched and meant for it. We never used the word love, but it was there. In every glance. Every touch. Every quiet moment we shared while pretending the world didn't exist. And still, I couldn't sleep at night. Because love built in shadows can't survive the light. And I knew, eventually, something would burn. I thought I could keep it under control. Thought I could draw a line in the sand and never let it blur. But love, or whatever we were falling into, doesn't care about boundaries. It seeps through the cracks, finds the quietest places, and blooms like rot. The first time my sister really looked at me, not just in passing, but deep, like only someone who's seen you at your worst can, she tilted her head and said, "You seem involved. Is there someone?" And I froze. It wasn't just the question. It was the way she asked it. Like she already knew the answer and was giving me a soft place to land. I lied. Of course I did. I smiled. The same smile I'd used 1,000 times when my marriage was dying, but I pretended it was still breathing and said, "No, I'm just enjoying the new rhythm of life." She stared at me a moment longer, then nodded, but something in her shifted. Micah, on the other hand, was starting to lean in harder. He was no longer content with secret glances and whispered conversations. He started talking about us. About nexts. "Come away with me," he said one evening. "I found this little cabin up north. No one would know. Just us. Just for a weekend." A weekend. That word hit me like a train. It was supposed to be a flicker. A flame we'd let burn out quietly. Not a fire we fed on purpose. I looked at him, really looked, and suddenly saw the weight in his eyes. Not just desire, but need. Escape. And maybe that's what scared me most. Because I saw myself in him. I told him I'd think about it. But I knew I wouldn't go. Then came the brunch. Micah's wife invited me, all smiles and kindness, totally unaware. A few other neighbors were there, sipping mimosas, passing around fruit salad like nothing was broken. I sat across from her, watched the way she laughed at his jokes, touched his arm out of habit, and I almost broke. The guilt sat like glass in my throat. My fork trembled in my hand. At one point, I excused myself and just stood in the hallway, staring at the family photos lining the wall. One of them was from a beach trip. Micah, his wife, their dog, all barefoot, smiling, sunlit. I don't remember breathing. When I got home, there was a message waiting on my phone. Micah, I want to stop hiding. I stared at it for a long time. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. And finally I sent. Me, you can't break what you still haven't tried to fix. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was just. I've tried. I swear I have. But it wasn't enough. Because the truth is, I never wanted to replace her. I didn't want his name on my mailbox or his toothbrush in my bathroom. I wanted the feeling, the one he gave me when we sat in silence and I didn't feel invisible. I started pulling away after that, answering texts slower, turning down invitations, making myself unavailable. But it didn't make me feel strong. It made me feel lost, like I'd built a house out of fog and now had nowhere to live. I stopped baking, stopped playing music at night, stopped standing by the window at the time I knew he'd be walking his dog. Everything felt hollow, like I'd stepped out of a dream and couldn't quite remember who I was before it started. Micah tried for a while. A flower left on my porch, a playlist sent to my email, little things, reminders that what we shared was real. But I couldn't answer, not without setting fire to everything. And yet, every time I passed his house, saw the porch lights on, heard the soft murmur of laughter inside, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. If walking away was noble or cowardly. If I had let go of something true or just something dangerous. The hardest part wasn't the missing. It was the remembering. The remembering how I felt when he looked at me like I mattered. Like I was seen. I wasn't trying to destroy a marriage. I wasn't trying to be the other woman. I was just trying to feel alive again. And somehow that led me straight into this quiet kind of heartbreak. The kind where no one knows you're grieving because no one knows what you lost. So I smiled at the world, kept going, pretended I didn't check my phone hoping for one last message. And all the while, the guilt and the ache walked beside me. Silent, heavy, uninvited. It was a Thursday. Gray skies, a little drizzle on the pavement, that kind of soft weather that makes you nostalgic for no reason. I'd made too much casserole the night before, a new recipe my sister had given me, and I thought, why not take some over to Micah and his wife? Something normal. Something neighborly. A way to prove to myself that things were under control again. That I could be decent. I wrapped the dish in foil, grabbed my umbrella, and walked across the lawn like I wasn't carrying a storm in my chest. Micah opened the door. He wasn't expecting me, that much I could tell. But he smiled, soft and surprised, the way he always did when he saw me. That smile that made everything else blur for a moment. I held up the casserole like a peace offering. Thought you two might want something warm for dinner, I said. My voice was too light, too rehearsed. He stepped aside to let me in, thanked me, made some joke about how his cooking couldn't compare. We stood in his kitchen, too close, just like always. And then it happened. The front door clicked open. A pair of keys landed in the ceramic bowl by the door. Footsteps. And then her voice. I forgot my phone. She turned the corner and stopped. Just like that. Micah's wife stood there, still holding her coat over one arm, purse slipping off her shoulder. Her eyes landed on the casserole first, then on Micah's hand, resting too comfortably on the edge of the counter, just inches from mine. Then she looked at me. Not a word. Not a sound. Her smile, the one she wore so easily, the one she'd given me at brunch, the one that said, "Thank you for being a good neighbor," just faded. It was subtle, slow, but it broke me open like glass. I felt it before I saw it. The shift. A stillness that wasn't quiet. It was loud in its own way. It screamed without raising its voice. And in that moment, I knew. The moment I saw the look on her face, I knew I had just broken something I could never fix. I opened my mouth. To explain? Apologize? But what was I going to say? That it didn't mean anything? It meant everything. That we didn't sleep together? We didn't have to. That I didn't want to hurt her? But I did. Without ever intending to. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stared at us like someone realizing the ground beneath her feet wasn't solid after all. Micah moved. Just slightly. But not toward her. Not toward me either. I stepped back. My hand still holding the warm dish, like it could somehow shield me from what I'd done. I'm sorry, I whispered. It was the only thing I could manage. And even that felt like a betrayal. Too small, too late. I turned and walked out. Didn't wait for her to say anything. Didn't wait for him to follow. Because he didn't. He didn't come after me. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. I got back home and set the casserole dish on my counter like a time bomb. It still smelled like garlic and rosemary. But all I could taste was shame. And silence. So much silence. And I knew, deep in my gut, that this wasn't a story that would end in forgiveness or closure. This was the kind that left scars. On good people. On unsuspecting lives. I didn't look out my window the next morning. Didn't check to see if his porch light was on or if her car was gone. I just sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I didn't drink from, trying to remember when it all started to go wrong. And realizing, maybe it wasn't one moment. Maybe it was all the little ones I ignored. All the glances I welcomed. All the boundaries I softened. All the lies I told myself. Just to feel alive. The next morning, I deleted his number. No second guessing. No ceremony. Just gone. There was no point in pretending anymore. He didn't reach out. And I didn't want him to. Not really. His house stayed quiet after that. No more yard work sounds. No porch light flicking on at dusk. No glimpses of him at the mailbox or passing glances on the sidewalk. It was like he vanished, but the outline of him stayed everywhere. Like a shadow burned into the places he once stood. I started leaving my blinds closed. Not out of fear. Out of shame. And then came the silence. My sister, who'd been calling every few days to check on me, to gossip, to tell me about her chaotic toddler or the new cafe she loved. She stopped. Just stopped. Maybe she sensed it. Maybe she was giving me space. Or maybe she just didn't know what to say anymore. Either way, it hurt. And the thing about shame is, it isolates you. Wraps around your neck like a scarf and whispers, you don't deserve comfort. So I turned inward. I started journaling. At first, it was angry. Rambling. A mess of ink and regret. Then it softened. Became quieter. More honest. I wrote things like, what was I really looking for in him? Why did I need someone else's attention to feel visible? When did I start believing love had to be secret to be exciting? The answers weren't simple. They never are. So I found a therapist. I remember walking into her office the first time, arms crossed so tightly across my chest it felt like I was trying to hold myself together with sheer willpower. She asked me what brought me in. And I said, I made a mistake that hurt someone. And I think it broke something in me too. She didn't flinch. Didn't judge. She just nodded. And for the first time, I let myself cry in front of someone without apologizing for it. Therapy didn't fix everything. But it gave me language. It gave me tools. And more than anything, it gave me space to be brutally honest with myself. I stopped saying, it just happened. I started saying, I made choices. And I can choose differently now. Some days were harder than others. Like when I passed the tree where we once stood talking about paint colors, pretending it was just about swatches and undertones, when really it was about being seen. Or when I'd opened the drawer where I kept the charger he borrowed once and forgot to return. and I'd still hear his laugh in the back of my mind. But eventually I started breathing again. Really breathing. Not in that short, shallow way you do when you're hiding, but deep, slow, present. I learned to cook for myself again. Not out of distraction, but care. I started walking in the evenings, not to catch a glimpse of his shadow, but to watch the sky change color. And one night, as I sat on the porch with a glass of red wine, just me and the quiet, I wrote in my journal. I didn't just lose him. I lost who I was pretending to be, and had to find who I really am. Not someone desperate for validation. Not someone chasing what didn't belong to her. But someone learning to be whole. And you know what? That version of me, she was worth all the mess it took to find her. It had been almost a year. Enough time for the seasons to shift, twice. Enough time for my hair to grow out, for the tightness in my chest to soften. Enough time for memories to lose their sting and become something quieter. That afternoon, I was at the little bookstore cafe downtown. The kind of place that smells like old paper, cinnamon, and rain. I'd just picked up a novel, something poetic, soft, and I was sitting by the window, half reading, half daydreaming. The street outside was buzzing in that quiet weekday way. Mothers pushing strollers. A couple sharing earbuds. Nothing remarkable. Until I looked up, and there he was. Micah, walking past the window alone. My breath caught, just for a second. It wasn't fear. Or longing. It was recognition. He looked different. Still handsome, yes. Still him. But softer around the edges. His hair a little longer. His eyes, tired in a way I understood. He didn't see me at first. But then, he did. And time didn't stop. It just slowed. Our eyes locked. No smile. No wave. No dramatic gesture. Just a quiet, still gaze that said everything words couldn't. I wonder what he saw in me. If he noticed the calm in my shoulders, the way I no longer looked over my shoulder for him. If he saw the woman who was no longer waiting for someone else's choice to define her life. He held my gaze for a second longer than he needed to. Then he nodded, barely, and walked on. And me? I closed the book gently, pushed the chair back, and stood. There was no ache in my chest. No urge to run after him. No tears. Just peace. That moment wasn't a door swinging open. It wasn't a wound reopening. It was a mirror. A reminder of where I'd been. Who I'd been. And how far I'd come. And as I walked out of that cafe, back into the world I'd rebuilt with my own two hands, I whispered to myself, some stories don't end with a kiss. Some end with a quiet understanding. And a promise to never forget. And that was enough. Have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to? Felt that pull so strong, it was like your heart was trying to rewrite the rules you thought you knew? Would you risk it all, your peace, your family, your future, for a chance at happiness, even if it meant losing everything else? I don't have answers. Just pieces of a story. And the hope that maybe, by sharing it, someone else feels less alone. So tell me, have you ever faced a moment that tested your heart? Where desire tangled with guilt, and every choice felt like stepping on glass? Comment below and share your story or your thoughts. Let's hold space for the messy, the complicated, the human. And if you want to hear more stories that go where others won't, stories that dive deep, feel real, and don't shy away from the hard truths, subscribe to Cheating Confession Diary. Because sometimes the best way to heal is to listen. And sometimes the best way to be heard is to speak your truth.